Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen Odegaard, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Welcome back to the Stop Overthinking podcast. I am so excited to have Stephanie Hickey here with us today. She is a sex, love, and relationship coach with a special interest in helping women take the necessary steps to take radical self-responsibility for their own pleasure, for the love they deserve, and in their relationships. She helps women create desire-led lives. And this is going to be a fantastic conversation. I was just telling Stephanie, we haven't really had the sex, love, relationship conversation on this podcast yet. And for all of you listeners out there, this is a part of our lives as women. And we can either get stuck in perfectionism mode of, what does my body look like? What is it doing? And then motherhood mode with all of the other things going on. And we are overthinking, just relationships and sex get put on the back burner. And people pleasers where you're not even in your own body and your passion, your love, your satisfaction is just a afterthought. So, Stephanie, welcome to the podcast and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That was a really great introduction and an introduction into, the actual work that I love doing, which is all body-based. It's all coming back into our bodies, which, as you were mentioning, gets pushed aside. Like sex and love and relationships are integral into our life, and they don't get the priority that I believe is required to have a flourishing, thriving sex and love life. And so that's how I came to the coaching. At first, I was kind of just doing it as an interest for my own self-development. And I was not sure if I was going to actually use it to coach. I wasn't sure if that was going to be my path, but I was definitely interested in the self-development portion of it because that's a high priority on my list. I have great value of mine is growth. And so I knew that at minimum, I was going to get a lot of great self-development out of this program.
Fabulous. So we know that sex, love, relationships, obviously big part of our lives. And the sex and love is a big part of the relationship. So who is the client that you normally see and what are some of the issues that they're bringing forward that they want to work on?
I'm seeing both people in relationships and people who are dating, who are wanting relationships. So I don't just work with people in relationships, for example. And actually, I don't work with couples. I work with individual women. And this is the radical self-responsibility portion that you described in the beginning. I work with women who are ready to really delve into themselves and into their own bodies and their own patterns and their own beliefs and looking at ways that they themselves can enhance or thrive or make changes. Because even if you are in a relationship, you working on you is going to, it's part of the ingredients of being in a relationship. Your change is going to affect the relationship no matter what. And we don't know what direction, but that's why I love working with individuals, even when they think, oh, but my partner's not on board or my partner's not interested in this. It doesn't matter, actually. And so yes, individual women and a lot of mothers too. A lot of mothers after having children, there's different considerations after having children with regards to sex, sexuality, libido, relationships themselves change. So
we will dive into a specific motherhood portion as part of this podcast. Just give us a few minutes to be a little more generalized here first.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you and I chatted about prior to this podcast is women often get stuck in doing mode rather than being mode. And can you explain what those are and why that could have an impact on love and relationships?
We have the longest list, the longest to-do list, always. And that's what I mean by we're always just doing. And sometimes we're not really even consciously taking the time to be conscious about how we're structuring our day. What are we filling our day with? If you're just doing the to-do list, your day goes by and you might feel depleted, or you might feel like, what was kind of the purpose of this day? Or you days and then weeks go by and then months go by and you're like, there's kind of like a missing element that you feel is missing in your life. You don't feel enlivened and you don't feel fulfilled. And so the being, which I like to focus on, is kind of asking questions like, who am I being, rather than what am I doing? And so a state of being could be like, I'm sitting in gratitude for this moment, for this morning coffee. And having like a breath and having like a moment, like spaciousness of being there, that, I mean, that's a gift for any moment, anything that you might be doing. Maybe you're getting groceries, and like the being mode of getting groceries could be like finding some pleasure in the thing that you're doing also puts you into like a being state, rather than like a go, 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 to do.
And when we are in that doing mode rather than being, what does that look like in terms of how it can impact um, desire, love, sex, things like that?
When we get into to do mode, we lose sight of our own individual passions and desires. And desires, I use them as beacons in our life. So when you're in to do mode, you're kind of getting the logistics of life getting complete. If you take a moment to look at the things that you actually desire, they shine a light on the elements that actually fill you up, the life-giving energy. If we never stop to take note of those things that we desire, and I'm not just talking sexual desire, I'm talking desire, like broadly, right? If we don't stop to take a look at those desires, then that's how you find like life is just passing you by. If you do stop to take a look at the things that you desire, and you repeat, like you keep coming back to those things that you desire, and really things come into your awareness that you're like, oh, that's something that I actually would really love to do. Like you start seeing things and you're like, notice like a dance class you'd like to sign up for, or you realize, I really love flowers. I'm noticing the flowers at the grocery store and I'm going to pick up a bouquet, and that enriches your environment. So those things, focusing on desire, is a big part of the work that I do too, for those reasons.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think for desire, sometimes there's this idea that either it's just there or it's not, or that the other person needs to take more responsibility for it rather than ourselves. So just more about that desire aspect.
So in the actual coaching that I do, we're constantly working on cultivating our own life force energy and not relying on an external force and not relying on an external person or environment. Although environment does, you can create the environment that you want that gives you that setting or feeling. So in the coaching that I do, we do a lot of talking like this. We would ask, a lot of revealing questions, a lot of prompting questions, a lot of internal work. And then there are actual like tantric and Taoist practices that cultivate life force energy in your body that work to increase desire, increase life force energy, increase sexual desire, increase creative energy. And that those are the actual practices that I give to my clients, that actually you can do that for yourself. You don't need somebody else's gaze to turn you on. You don't need somebody else's input to actually turn you on. And by turn on, I mean like just like a lighting up.
So you said like tantric practices, and I'm familiar with the term. I've heard it, but I couldn't actually tell you a whole lot about it. Or is it more eroticism? Like, what is this?
So Tantra is a philosophy and a set of spiritual practices. The practices focus on the direction and manipulation of energy as a means of liberation. And it focus, unlike other religions or philosophies, the practitioner uses the life force energy and the body instead of transcending the body. You're actually using your body as a means of liberation, as a means of cultivating pleasure and cultivating life force. And so our current day understanding of eroticism is quite narrow and limited in its scope. It's actually eroticism is life force energy. It is like pleasure and beauty all around us.
Thank you for that clarification. I know we talked a little bit too, like one of the things that women really struggle with is just getting out of their head
Mhm.
during sex. And like that's just
Mhm.
a really widespread common thing. So we wanted to bring it up on this podcast. So work through that.
Yeah, that's a really common one, and I'm glad you asked it. In the actual coaching session, we would dig a little deeper into what are the things that are actually going through your head then. If you're in your head, what are the things you're thinking? Followed by following the thread into the body, we would locate in the client's body where resistances, blocks, ideas, beliefs, patterns, where they're existing in the body. And we would explore that and reveal that even more. Might have conversations with it, might integrate it with other practices. And then outside of coaching, for this specific issue, I would definitely offer some guided self-pleasure practices, which if you've never done one, highly recommend. It already gets you out of your head. You're already not having to be in your head because you're listening to somebody else guide you. And that's like, for me, as long as I've been doing this work, I still find so much use in somebody else's guidance during self-pleasure practices for that reason alone. It's just like,
Mhm.
oh, what a relief from being outside of my own head. So I would give guided practices. Then those specific practices probably would entail the holistic sex tools, which
Mhm.
they sound, I'm going to say boring, but when you actually start to utilize them, you'll understand the power of them. They are the breath, using your breath, focusing your breath, and breathing into like different areas of your body. Focus/intention. So
Mhm.
bringing your awareness and focus into different areas of your body rather than your head.
Mhm.
Movement, using your physical body to move yourself in different ways, new ways. Sounding out different sounds, new sounds, sounding out things like maybe there's actual rage or resentment or any, sounding out the actual feeling that you're having in your body. And then there's energy. So if you start to do these practices, you might start to become very attuned to your energy in your body. And then you can start to manipulate and move that energy around your body and expand energy from maybe just the sex organs into more of the belly area, more of the chest area, more of the head. And so that
Mhm.
expansion actually creates more pleasure. But those tools, those 5 tools alone are
Mhm.
super, super helpful in getting you out of your head. And we
Very
would work
cool.
one by one, like very
Mhm.
slowly, one by one, practicing each. Mm-hmm.
And for listeners who are here and they're like, okay, so I'm working with a sex coach. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what what is that like in the sense, like you had said, you have some self-guided practices that people could certainly do on their own.
What does the session look
I
like?
know that there are questions in people's minds. So if you just want to address some of that, are you
Yes.
talking through things? Are there times when you're walking people through practices with camera off? Like, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. It depends on the client's comfort level. So in our program, we were guided online. Our Zoom cameras were off, our sound was off, and we were guided online like 3 times a week. We were doing this with women from around the world, and you become very used to it, and it becomes very normalized. But I don't always do that in session, and in fact, I quite rarely do that in session. It's usually homework or what I call home play given. So in session itself, it's all like very kosher. We're talking about very intimate, what feels like difficult topics that we don't always get to talk about with people. And that alone, I mean, that can be a really healing process alone, is just to be able to say the things
Yeah.
that you haven't been able to say. But in session, no, we do parts work, we do breath work, we do activate energy, yes.
Mhm.
We do a lot of talking, a lot of different types of meditations that get you into like a bit of your subconscious. easier. But no, that's a great question, and I hope that clarifies.
It did. So thank you for that, a little aside, but for
Hmm.
again, for your listeners, if you're like, "What is this all about?" Now
Yeah.
now you know. So another, issue that I often hear from women and something that I've struggled with during my life is just body confidence. And certainly this changes throughout your life, and we can start tying this in after kids and things too, but it's like, if you're not feeling body confident, it's sometimes can be really hard to be sexy or feel like you're desired or want to take your clothes off or any of those things. So
Mm.
I'm just wondering, is that something that you see as often with body confidence? And are there some things that you can offer that might be helpful to people?
It's such a shame that there's so much hate for our own life-giving bodies and our own, like, the mechanism that allows us to move through the world, like the actual mechanics of our body is so miraculous. And so there's a lot of sadness in me about how much hate and negative talk and negative feelings that women and men, like, men have the same issues, which I notice as well. So there's there's a whole section of my coaching about self-love and self-gratitude. There are, I think I can say this on this podcast, but it's helpful see gazing so that you start to look at like, if you've never looked at your vulva, starting there can feel really uncomfortable, and just starting there, kind of getting yourself used to looking there. And then obviously the gratitude expression, the gratitude, the love, that kind of practice is going to help, coming back into your body and loving it. There's things like breast massage. So a lot of love and a lot of love and gratitude around the breast area. Beyond that, I mean, there are many, many more practices I won't get into, but there are things like rescripting. We go into, like, rescripting our sexuality. What did we learn? What were we taught?
Yeah.
What do we actually want to believe? As this grown woman, what are things that I'm actually not, I don't want anymore? I actually did not choose that belief. And I would love to leave that aside, and then rescript my own identity around my sexuality, my own thoughts around my sexuality and my body. And it doesn't happen just once. Like, we do have to do this over and over again.
Mhm.
Oh, I would,
On that note, that women, I think the message is so convoluted around sex, especially depending on your upbringing. But if there was some sort of religious tie into that, so often there's, shame with
mm-hmm,
with sexuality, and you need to ignore
mm-hmm,
it up until a certain point, and then you get
mm-hmm,
married, and then you're supposed to know everything and do. And if you are engaging in different sex acts before the appropriate time,
mm-hmm.
right, it's like with certain people that's glorified, with other people it's shameful.
Yep.
And so
Mm-hmm.
the messaging around that, and then you throw in the whole body piece, and no wonder
No wonder we're
we,
having no wonder we're in our heads
yeah,
about it all, and no wonder we don't
yeah,
love ourselves the way we should. Like, the beauty that women are, like the beauty that we offer to the world, the
mhm,
miraculous things that our bodies do, like give life, or create out in the world, whatever it is that you want to do. It's really convoluted messaging. You're right.
yeah.
And so
And so I
unwinding that and unpacking that is super important. And that is truly, like, it's like the base, kind of like a foundation before you go
mhm,
into, how are we going to change this? How are we going to rewire our brains to experience pleasure in a
right.
brand new way? Is
Mhm.
like starting from there, starting from those beliefs.
Yes, and then of course, depending on your experiences, or with whether that's with a partner and how comfortable it was, and I mean, it
Yes,
just gets layered and layered and layered. So
exactly. Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's one of the reasons why we said we were, just excited to have this conversation, because I think it doesn't happen enough for people, even though it's supposed to be this enjoyable part of life. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's not, or it becomes part of the to-do list, or it's
Mm-hmm.
or and
That's a good point, actually. It becoming a part of the to-do list. That's really, like, great observation. And how can we reclaim our pleasure for ourselves? How can we focus on our bodies and our pleasure, and then from that place, knowing that our bodies can give us pleasure and knowing that we can give ourselves pleasure, and then going from that place to a partner and bringing that to the partner, and from there it being like a desirous place and not a to-do list. That's a really
Yeah.
great point, Kristen.
So let's talk about low libido in general. We've kind of alluded to it, and we know that this certainly can impact by age, whether you have children, and it will change, during motherhood. But how do you address that? So let's start just kind of diving into that conversation.
That's a stretch. It's such a big question.
All right, we're warming up and ready to go.
There's so many components and it's so individual. So first of all, women, we're very cyclical. Our bodies are on a cycle. And so step one, I would really encourage women to become very acquainted with their body's cycles. And if you've never really delved into like what the stages of the cycles are, I highly recommend starting there. And from there, you can start tracking your own libido or your own sex drive like daily throughout the month. Now, things like external pressures and stress and exhaustion are always going to play into a part of libido. So we then look at what does your week look like? How much is on your plate? What areas are really stressful in your life? And how can we, mitigate those? Then there are things like responsive and spontaneous desire. Are you presented with a sexual situation and you immediately are like, oh, I'm into that? Or do you have to be warmed up into? Do you have specific ways that you like to be turned on or slowly turned on, or that foreplay? What does that look like for you? There's also things called Jaya's work is erotic blueprints. What is your specific blueprint for your arousal? There's sexual, there's sensual, there's kinky, there's energetic, and then there's the shapeshifter who kind of goes between them all. There's a very easy online quiz to find out which yours is. And understanding from that perspective, in what ways do I get turned on? What situations do I find what elements in my environment allow me to feel more turned on than others? Where else could we go? So those are just like a few they're huge topics. Each one of those is a huge topic on its own, but put them all together and you're like, okay, I have a lot to look at here, right?
Let's
Okay.
talk about brakes and accelerators for a moment with that. Can
Yes.
you describe what they are and how that may come into?
Yes. So Emily Nagoski has a book called Come As You Are, and in it she noticed or observed in her research that there are brakes to your turn on and there's accelerators. So things that turn you off and things that turn you on. And the starting point is starting to look at those things in your own specific life and in your own sex life. Breaks could be, well, definitely stress and the external factors like that act as breaks for some people. But even things like expectation. Is my partner expecting sex today? That could be either a break or an accelerator for somebody. But you have to know specifically for you, what is that? Like for me, that is a break. Any expectation, and I'm like, my breaks go way up. Take the expectation off the table, and my accelerator starts to ramp up. I'm like, okay, anything is possible here, including when I say no, I'm not really in the mood. That's a totally valid answer, and that I'm not going to get some attitude in return or something,
Mm-hmm.
Accelerators could be, I love to hear words of affirmation. I'd love to hear some flirty text all day. I'd love to receive a hug or a kiss before we leave the house. Like things like that really make you feel connected, make you feel safe and secure. And it could also be like, I love the scent of this candle. And that's like going to put me in the mood. I love having the lights off for my imagination to go a little bit wild. Or I love the lights on so that I can see your beautiful face, whatever. So these are very specific things that you are very individual and can really help you understand the landscape of your particular sexuality and turn on.
And I would recommend, if you have not heard or seen of this book, it's Dr. Emily Nagoski again, Come As You Are. It's long. There are sections that can be a little bit more dry. The whole idea of just how your body works, I think, was
Yes.
really good for me to hear, because whatever sex ed I had, however many decades ago, certainly didn't cover it. And again, we're maybe not talking about it. You have figured out certain pieces,
Mm-hmm.
but as life changes and things get stressful or whatever, sometimes she's a researcher and can put some of this into perspectives. I really just found it interesting if you like learning and the
Mm-hmm.
self-development kind of stuff. Even if you only take pieces from the book,
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
say just go check that out.
Yeah. I'm so glad you read that book. It's really life changing. It was part of our curriculum, actually. We had to read it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, good stuff. What one of the things that you and I touched on when we were talking too was a little bit about having boundaries and knowing where to put those in place in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that tends to be kind of a hot topic with a lot of my listeners anyway. So let's talk about boundaries when if people need them in their life, in order to improve um, desire, their relationship as a whole. Just what what's coming to mind for you?
What's coming to mind for me is it's actually almost in reverse. Not even almost. It is a reverse. So if you're struggling to put in boundaries into place, which then leads to like overperforming or over handling life or feeling resentful or feeling exhausted, if you find that you're struggling putting boundaries into life, I would suggest going back and looking at your desires list. Once you get crystal clear about what you desire in life and those bigger, broader kind of ways, then you know what you're actually protecting with that boundary. And it becomes much easier to speak up and state your boundary. And it becomes easier, not that you have to defend your boundary, but it becomes easier to talk about why that boundary is important for you. So for example, if Kristen you decide to put up, you wanted to start a podcast. If you didn't know your why, like if you just said, do you have children? I didn't ask you. Do you have children?
Two teenagers. Yep.
Two teenagers. So if you said, listen, I have to, I need like complete silence in my house from 3 till 5. And they're like, okay, but you never told them if you didn't really know why, or you didn't tell them why, or it wasn't even really a high priority. You were just like, I just need silence in my house. You might let it slide. You might let them walk in the door. You might like let some music play downstairs. But if you're like, no, I really want to start a podcast for this reason. It's going to fill me up. It's going to, feed me. It's going to feed my soul. It's going to like bring me a lot of enjoyment. It's going to educate me. It's going to do all of these things. Those are all desires. Like it's going to do all these things for me. Then you can say, listen, I'm going to do this podcast for these reasons. And I'd love to have the house quiet for, 2 hours from this time to this time. Then it becomes so much easier to put that boundary into place. And yeah, that's what I have to say about that. I realized that recently, that desire is kind of the root.
Hmm. Yeah, and I like that. And actually, my listeners would be familiar. I talk a lot about knowing your priorities and your values,
Mm,
and I think you could insert desires in there then as well, right? Because that is what's important to you.
yeah.
That's what gets scheduled first. That's where your time and energy and effort go, your finances, your resources, whatever it might be. Yeah, and then it is so much easier to accept into your life the things that agree with it, and to be
Hmm.
able to put the boundaries in place for the stuff that it's like, no, that doesn't work, or that's going to deplete from some of these other things. So,
That's
uh,
that's
yeah,
exactly it. Yeah,
perfect.
and yeah, I love that. I love that values list. That's something that I like to work on with clients too, is a values list.
Mhm.
What I like about desire is it's like almost it's like nourishing to the soul, when you really know what you desire. Those are the things that give you life and light you up, and that's the life force energy which is just the same as creative and sexual energy. It's all kind of the same thing, but that's the desire is what feeds that. And so when you can really understand those for yourself, then yeah, then you start living a desire led life.
Yes, very good. So, motherhood, again, we've alluded to a couple times. What are some of the commonalities that you see happening? Like somebody has kids and, there are some common types of changes that people are going to see with their sex life and in relationships. And where does that become a problem? Where do you see that with clients as becoming a problem?
In relationships, it starts expectation is the first common problem. So never having a conversation before having kids about what each partner expects of one another. And then the reality sets in of like, okay, what's actually um, biologically possible for me to do versus what's for you to do right now. And it's like for me coming to terms with that and then actually enjoying that aspect of having, like, I'm the one that's nursing and my body is not mine anymore for how many years. Um, so working through those mental like shifts for women is very common. Like coming to the reality of motherhood from that perspective, from a biological perspective. Um, Again, coming back to the cycle. So your sex life might, not for everybody, but it might be pushed to the side because of things like I'm not getting enough sleep. If my basic needs are not being met, then like I'm not probably going to be in the mood. Um,
Mhm.
so
Well,
that's a
yeah,
very
if you're
common
exhausted, or even if you've got little ones, you hear about people just feeling touched out.
feeling
And
touched out.
that
Exactly.
is like, I have
It's a
had
real
little
thing.
hands grabbing at me or holding somebody all day long, and I don't want any more hands or anything
Same.
on me. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
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 And,
Exactly.
I think what's part of that too is most people, and if maybe you've been through that stage, my kids are older, I see it. I wish I would have known more about it when they were little, like, just to normalize some of these conversations about, um, what changes, like, with your body, and, um, your hormones are totally out of whack for a while, and being able to have some of the open conversations that wasn't part of my relationship, and it probably should have been, um, but
What would you
again,
have loved to have known at that time, or before that time, or during that time?
yeah. Well, I think again, we had some of the conversations about expectations, but I think once putting it into practice, sometimes that looks different. And then I changed jobs, a significant job change when my son was 2, my oldest was 2.5 or so. Um, and I don't know that we really revisited some of those
Mm,
pieces. And then so I was doing more and more and more. And, some of that resentment fills in. And when you're feeling resentful from somebody, like, intimacy, it's harder to to create at
mhm,
times.
mhm,
And if I'm crabby, there's or I'm doing more where it just felt like
mhm.
I'm taking on more of this load. So some of that, I think those are just hard years when the kids are that little.
I think
So
I think letting people know that is
yeah,
like just that
that
alone,
those
like knowing that is they just are.
they
It's a
that some of
phase of
those
life,
yep,
and
some of those are hard years,
yeah.
and the hard conversations, right? I mean, because I think that comes again to about nobody told us how to have relationships either.
How to have communication,
And
how to have
and
connection. Yeah.
right, and so then we have to have an awkward conversation about, you know, sex and desire and helping me out around the house. And I think some of that was I I didn't know how the response was going to be, so I just didn't want to deal with it. Or I
Yes.
tried having the conversation, it didn't go well, and then
Yes.
I get even more resentful. And so I think that's the piece too, was just even those communication skills where it becomes so much more important. And instead of pulling away from each other or stonewalling or being defensive or, any of those um, kind of things that people go to,
Yes.
that you've almost really got to double down on the good communication and knowing yourself, because it's really easy to get lost in that and want to blame the other person. But I think that's where I wish somebody would have said, like, "Hey, Kristen, you need to pause and, like, what do you need and what do you want? Stop pointing
Ex-
fingers, stop blaming the kids, stop, like, focus on you." And, because I was just on autopilot, I think.
Yes. And what did autopilot look like? Like, give me a day in the life.
Yeah, I mean, when they were little, it was like, my husband was working in road construction at that time, so he was gone before like usually at like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and then home late at night. So everything in terms of getting the kids up, getting them fed, getting out to work, doing those things, all the childcare pieces, if somebody needed to be picked up differently. I mean, I was arranging all of that.
Yeah.
And he was home more in the winter, and when stuff wasn't done. So again, I mean, so our schedule was fairly chaotic. It felt to me a lot. And I was just freaking tired, quite honestly. Like, I was just tired for a bunch of years. So
Yeah. And what if you could like deliver like a little message to that person, what is something that you would implement for Kristen at that time, for you, that would have broken the autopilot, or
mhm.
would have inserted into your day a little bit of reprieve or
Yeah.
joy or lightness? What is like one thing that you can remember or that you know
Um,
now?
I think I would have tried to delegate more, or to let some other things go, like the
Mm,
need to do things, and whether that was, constantly having stuff picked up, or whatever, like
yeah.
some of that, it's like, who cares?
Yeah.
This point. But it seems important sometimes in that moment. But again, too, I think for us, part of that was not knowing how, you know, not having the communication skills that I've said
Yeah.
multiple times. And that was for us. And that can be hard because the other person has to want to be part of that conversation
Yes.
then as well. So I mean, there's things I can do, but um and
So
I
delegating some things in order
delegating some
to, so
things.
that Kristen
Um,
could,
so that I wasn't running like crazy all of
yeah,
the time,
yeah,
and would be able to find more time just for me beyond the um, hour a week that,
yes,
that I might have to go do something, because that wasn't enough to fill me
yeah,
up.
yes,
And I think too that my defense mechanism when I would get angry and frustrated, and it was to push him away rather than like, hey, let's figure this out together.
yeah, yeah, that's so common. I know.
Mhm.
Yeah. So learning those, like, yeah, opening the conversation and just knowing, there are ways to bring these conversations up. There are ways to feel heard and to be heard and to listen in return. And like those communication tools and the connection tools, yeah, I have, yeah, I I want to spread those things so that women and mothers specifically can begin to get more of their cells fed and more of their,
Mhm.
the nourishment that they need for themselves. Um, yeah, that's a pretty big passion of mine. So that's why I actually I'm starting a mistress mind for this specific thing for mothers, which I can talk
Yes.
about now or after.
Yeah,
But
please do.
yeah, I didn't see this in my industry anywhere, and I knew it was essential and it was needed. And so I was like, oh, that's what I need to do. It's a sex, love, and relationship mistress mind. And if you know what a mastermind is, mistress is just the feminine form of master. And so I was like, yeah, this is for mothers. This is a mistress mind.
Love it.
And yeah, it's for mothers who want to do just that, is to stop being on autopilot so that they can be, like we were talking about in the beginning, be more of the woman that they want to be. It's so easy to just become that one kind of that one identity of mom once you become a mom. And after I had two daughters and then I did the program. So I got the advantage of, after the third daughter, finally, I had all of this work and all these tools in my toolkit to pull from. And what a difference, like what a difference it's made for me after having the third daughter and in motherhood, and realizing when I can focus more on me, and it's just like in small ways, but when I know how to um, ask myself these really important questions of what lights me up, what feeds my soul, what nourishes me, what do I desire, then I'm actually a better mother and I'm a better partner. So I'm starting a Mistress Mind. It's just going to be a small group of 6 women. It's going to start in June, but it's for those mothers who want to feel more of this, who don't feel confident and radiant walking around, who don't feel like they have another identity other than mother, but want to, um, and who don't want to use having children as an excuse for not following her own desires and her own dreams. That's a big one too. And also
Yes.
for if you just like, I've lost interest in sex and that's my main focus. I want to find my libido again. I want to find my desire and my sexuality again. Yes, this is where it's at, because it's like a very specific, topic for a very specific group of people coming
Mhm.
together to work these intimate conversations together. And I have all
Yeah.
of these somatic tools, therapeutic tools, conversations, meditation. I have so many things that I want to bring to this group. So,
Fantastic.
mhm.
And so the Mistress Mind will be coming. What other um, types? We know that you coach. What do you offer, and where can people learn more about it?
Yeah, so I do work one-on-one. I have my one-on-one coaching practice for women and men. I should mention, I don't advertise that I work with men, but I do. I actually have a couple of my clients right now, and I love working with men. There's just more of a involved application process is all, but I love working with men. You can, yeah, my website is wonderlovecoaching.com, and my Instagram is the same, wonderlovecoach. So right now, those are my two offerings: is my one-on-one coaching, and then the Mistress Mind coming up. I I have a group coaching program that I'm actually going to turn into like a self-paced course. So that's in the works, but it is just like more of the knowledge. If you have a knowledge gap in sex or sexuality, then that's going to fill in that. Plus the guided practices are all
Okay.
available in the self-paced course, so that you can just press play and be like in your own room, in your own privacy, and be like, and have the exploration for your own self and your own body. Yeah,
Excellent. And as always, I will link her Instagram and website in the show notes as well. So, any parting thoughts, Stephanie, before we wrap up this podcast?
um, I am just so grateful to be able to do this for my work. I feel so honored every session I have with somebody. I feel so honored to be there in session with them, bringing such tender and vulnerable pieces of themselves. And I, I feel grateful to be able to speak about it and share it with, more people on platforms like this podcast. So thank you so much for having me,
Yes,
Kristen.
thank you, thank you. And I'm glad that we were able to um, at least initiate this conversation, right? I mean, we know that
Yeah,
it's way deeper depending on so many of the different aspects that we alluded to here, but to start that conversation, start the awareness within yourself, and maybe point you to some of the resources that can help you on your own journey as well.
absolutely. Yes.
Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen Odegaard. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Have a great week.